When the world slipped into darkness and silence pressed against the edges of villages, the Greeks believed another presence lingered. At the crossroads where paths divided, in doorways where safety gave way to danger, she was there, torches in hand, dogs at her side, moving through the shadows that others feared to enter. Hecate was no ordinary goddess. She was a Titan's daughter who survived the fall of her kin. Yet she walked freely among Olympians honored by Zeus, invoked by witches, and feared by mortals. She belonged not to one realm, but to all three, earth, sea, and sky. Hers was the power of transitions, the unseen choices, the mysteries of night and death. Again and again she appears in the margins of great tales, guiding Demeter in her search for Persephone, granting victory in the war against the giants, standing beside sorceresses like Medea, and receiving secret offerings at every moon's end. She was not the goddess of love or of war, but of something older, stranger, and harder to grasp. Was she a goddess of fear haunting crossroads with restless spirits? A protector of households, standing guard at doorways with her hounds, or a cosmic force linked to the moon and the mysteries of fate itself? To the Greeks, she was all of these and more. This is the story of Hecate, the goddess of magic, crossroads, and witchcraft. Origins. Hecate's story begins not with the Olympians, but with the Titans. She was said to be the daughter of Perseus, a Titan bound to destruction and raw force, and Asteria, the goddess of the starry night. From that union came a figure who embodied liminality, born of violence and darkness, yet destined to move freely between light and shadow. When Zeus rose to power and cast down the Titans, most of their children were stripped of honor, banished to obscurity, or chained in Tartarus. But Hecate was different. Hesiod tells us in the Theogony that Zeus not only spared her but granted her authority greater than most Olympians. Yet some believed her origins ran deeper than even the Titans. Ancient whispers traced her back to the lands beyond Greece, Thrace, Caria, or Anatolia, where people already worshipped a torch-bearing goddess tied to night, magic, and the underworld. If true, then Hecate's presence in Greek myth was more than inheritance. It was survival, an older goddess absorbed and reshaped, but never diminished. From the beginning, she was not a goddess of one clear domain, like Apollo with his sun, or Poseidon with his seas. She was instead tied to the spaces in between. To stand at a crossroads, at the edge of night, or at the boundary of life and death was to stand in her realm. Hecate was the one who moved between worlds, and it was from this liminal birthright that her power drew its strength. Appearance. The Greeks rarely agreed on how the gods truly looked. But with Hecate, the uncertainty was part of her nature. She was a goddess who belonged to thresholds and shadows, and her image often reflected that mystery. In early art, she appears as a single figure, tall, torch-bearing, often cloaked, sometimes holding a key or a dagger. The torches were her most consistent symbol, lighting the darkness as she guided mortals or descended into the underworld. At her side, artists sometimes added dogs, hounds that howled at night, and were said to sense her presence before humans ever could. Over time, her image changed. By the classical and Hellenistic periods, she was no longer shown as one figure, but three: the triple-bodied Hecate, a form we'll return to later in the story. Other symbols clung to her as well. Snakes coiled at her feet, keys dangled from her hands, and in some depictions, she carried a whip, a rope, or a dagger. Everything about her imagery spoke of boundaries, things that bound, unlocked, guided, or cut away. She was not radiant like Apollo or beautiful like Aphrodite. She was instead shadowed, watchful, a figure you sensed at the edges of firelight, never fully in view. For the Greeks, her appearance was not meant to comfort. It was meant to remind them that some forces could not be tamed, only respected. Family, society, relationships. Hecate's place among the gods was unusual. As we already mentioned, her parents were the Titan Perseus, tied to raw force and destruction, and Asteria, a goddess of the starry night who cast herself into the sea to escape Zeus, later becoming the island of Delos. From them, Hecate inherited both the violence of her father and the starlit mystery of her mother, a heritage that made her naturally liminal, a goddess who lived in between extremes. Her ties extended far beyond her lineage. Among the Olympians, Hecate was closely connected to Persephone. When Hades abducted the Maiden into the underworld, Hecate alone heard her cries. She guided Demeter in her desperate search. And when Persephone was finally allowed to return for part of each year, Hecate became her companion in the underworld. This role cemented her as a goddess who could move freely between worlds of the living and the dead. In time, Hecate's identity intertwined with other goddesses of the night. She was associated with Artemis, the huntress who roamed the wilderness, and with Selene, the personification of the moon. The three became linked as a triad of lunar power, Maiden, Mother, and Crone, with Hecate taking the most mysterious aspect in later traditions, though in earlier myths she could appear youthful and torch-bearing. This evolution reflected her ability to adapt, taking on aspects of different deities without losing her own identity. Hecate's family then was less about bloodline and more about connections. She belonged to the Titans by birth, to the Olympians by honor, and to the underworld by companionship. No single world claimed her fully, and that was her greatest strength. She was a goddess of every border and turning point, a figure whose power stretched across all of Greek mythology. Personality, roles, powers. Hecate was unlike the gods who ruled with loud declarations or open displays of force. She was quieter, subtler. This gave her an aura of mystery that made mortals approach her with both reverence and unease. At her core, Hecate was a liminal goddess. She presided over the places of transition, crossroads where three paths met. The space between the safety of a home and the danger of the outside. The shifting line between life and death. These were places the Greeks regarded as dangerous, where the familiar order of the world weakened and the unknown pressed close. To leave an offering at a crossroads or to pray at a doorway was to ask Hecate's protection against what might slip through unseen. Her roles were wide and often paradoxical. She was a guardian of households, honored with small shrines at doors to keep away restless spirits. Farmers prayed to her for fertile crops. Sailors invoked her on dark waters, and women called on her during childbirth. Yet at the same time, she was the mistress of ghosts and witchcraft, able to summon the dead or unleash phantoms that terrified entire villages. She was feared as a night wanderer, yet trusted as a protector. She was invoked to bless and to curse, to heal and to harm. Her powers reflected this duality. With her torches, she could pierce the darkest night and guide those who were lost, whether mortals in the wilderness or souls in the underworld. With her keys, she could unlock doors between realms, granting or denying access to places no mortal could tread. Her hounds sensed spirits before humans did, and their cries at midnight were believed to signal her passing. She commanded snakes, ghosts, and spirits of the restless dead, not through brute strength, but through authority that few dared challenge. Unlike Olympians such as Ares or Hera, Hecate did not lash out in bursts of temper. Her presence was steadier, more inevitable. She was the reminder that night always falls, that decisions must always be made at the crossroads, and that every decision held consequences. Mortals didn't simply worship her. They sought her favor in moments where fate itself felt uncertain. In personality, Hecate embodied the constant tension between fear and protection. She was not defined by cruelty, though she could be terrifying, nor by gentleness in the manner of Demeter or Hestia, though she could be protective. Instead, she stood as a force at the edges of human life, holding the power to bless or to curse, depending on how she was approached. To the Greeks, she was never a goddess to be ignored. For to neglect her was to risk the shadows turning against you. The Titanomachy. When the old order collapsed, the very foundations of the cosmos shook. The Titanomachy was not just a war between generations. It was the breaking and remaking of the world. On one side stood the Titans, the children of Uranus and Gaia, who had ruled since the dawn of time. On the other, the Olympians, the younger gods led by Zeus, who sought to overturn their father's reign. Most of the Titans fought fiercely against the upstart gods. The war raged for 10 long years, thundering across earth, sea, and sky. In the end, Zeus and his siblings triumphed, and the defeated Titans were cast into the abyss of Tartarus, shackled in chains that would never break. Their allies were stripped of honor, their names diminished, their power erased. But not all who bore Titan blood were swept away in defeat. Hecate stood apart. She had chosen her side carefully, lending her aid to Zeus in the struggle. When victory came, the king of the gods did not forget her loyalty. Zeus did not diminish her, nor take away what she had once possessed. Instead, he granted her authority across the 3 great realms of existence. On earth, she could bless crops and livestock or curse them with blight. On the sea, she could grant safe passage or stir storms against sailors. In the sky, she could bring favor to kings or withhold her gifts, shaping the fate of entire nations. Few gods held such sweeping influence. This decision made Hecate unique among the children of the Titans. Though not an Olympian herself, she stood elevated, honored even by the new ruler of Olympus. Zeus trusted her power, recognizing that she embodied something that could not be erased. The Titanomachy had destroyed an age, yet it had also secured her place in the new one. Hecate survived not by fading into obscurity, but by becoming indispensable, her torches burning as brightly in the new world as they had in the old. The Abduction of Persephone. One of the most haunting stories of Greek myth begins with a maiden gathering flowers in a meadow. Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, bent down to pluck a blossom when the earth split open and Hades, lord of the underworld, rose up in his chariot. With a sweep of his arm, he seized her, dragging her screaming into the darkness below. The cries of Persephone echoed through the air, but most of the gods were deaf to them. Only 2 heard, Hecate and Helios, the all-seeing sun. Where Helios watched silently from the heavens, it was Hecate who moved. With her twin torches blazing, she came to Demeter, the grieving mother wandering the earth in despair. Guided by Hecate's light, Demeter scoured the land, searching for her lost daughter, refusing to let the earth bear fruit until she was returned. As we touched on earlier, Hecate's guidance was not a footnote, but a defining moment in the myth. It was she who accompanied Demeter to Helios, demanding he reveal what he had seen. And it was again Hecate who guided Demeter to Hades' realm when Persephone was allowed to return, though bound to the underworld by the pomegranate seeds she had eaten. From that moment onward, Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother and part with her husband in the underworld. Hecate's role did not end there. She chose to remain with Persephone, becoming her companion and guide in the shadowed realm. This placed her in a unique position, neither bound to Olympus nor chained to the underworld, but free to move between them. She was the light that accompanied Persephone on her yearly descent, burning even in the depths of Hades' kingdom. For the Greeks, this story cemented Hecate as more than a goddess of night or crossroads. She was a psychopomp, a guide of souls standing at the boundary between life and death. Just as she led Persephone, so too was she believed to lead the shades of the dead, and perhaps even the living who dared to seek knowledge from the other side. Hecate was not the central figure of the Persephone myth, but her presence was indispensable. Without her torches, Demeter's search would have remained blind. Without her companionship, Persephone's return to the underworld would have been lonelier still. In the great cycle of life, death, and rebirth, Hecate stood always at the threshold, holding the keys to what lay beyond. The Gigantomachy. If the Titanomachy was the war of generations, then the Gigantomachy was the war of survival. From the blood of Uranus spilled upon the earth, the giants were born vast, monstrous beings whose power rivaled the gods themselves. When they rose against Olympus, it was not just a battle of strength, but a clash that threatened to unravel the balance of the cosmos. Each god fought fiercely, choosing their foe among the giants. Some accounts tell of Zeus hurling his thunderbolts, of Athena crushing Enceladus beneath Sicily, of Poseidon splitting polybotes with his trident. And among these battles stood Hecate. She was not a goddess of brute force, but of torches, magic, and the unseen powers of night. When the giant Clytius, son of Gaia, charged against the gods, it was Hecate who struck him down. With her blazing torches, she unleashed fire upon him, consuming him in a fury of light and flame. Some later poets claimed she fought with daggers, others that she summoned spirits and phantoms to overwhelm him. Whatever the weapon, the outcome was the same. Clytius fell before her, proving that even the strongest of the earthborn monsters could not withstand the power she carried. This was more than a single victory. In a war where raw strength often decided the outcome, Hecate's triumph showed the value of cunning, intellect, and the powers that lingered in darkness. She was not a goddess who needed armies or thrones. With her torches alone, she brought down a giant of feet that set her alongside the mightiest defenders of Olympus. The Gigantomachy ended with the giants defeated, their rebellion crushed, and the gods once again secure upon their thrones. Yet the memory of Hecate's role endured. Though not an Olympian, she was remembered as one of their most vital allies, a distinction that perfectly matched her place between worlds. To mortals who left offerings at her shrines, this tale carried weight. Hecate was not merely a goddess of crossroads or magic. She was a defender of order itself, capable of striking down even the greatest of threats. She was the reminder that fire, in the right hands, could both guide and destroy. The world of witches. If there was one realm where Hecate's power was felt most directly by mortals, it was in the world of magic. To the Greeks, she was the goddess who heard whispered prayers at night, the one invoked in spells and curses, the guardian of crossroads where the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Witches, necromancers, and seers alike turned to her. They believed she held the keys to the hidden forces of the universe, not only the power to summon spirits, but also the authority to command them. With her torches, she lit the way through darkness. With her keys, she unlocked the gates of the underworld. With her hounds, she patrolled the liminal spaces where ghosts wandered. Every ritual of night carried some trace of her name. Offerings to Hecate were left at crossroads at the dark of the moon, when shadows grew longest and the world felt most uncertain. These offerings, known as Hecate's dapanon, often included food, garlic, cakes, or even small sacrifices. The gifts were left at night and never touched again, for to take what belonged to her was to invite ruin. Stray dogs often consumed these offerings, and their howls at midnight were taken as signs of her acceptance. She was also tied to the restless dead. In some tales, she walked with phantoms trailing behind her, spirits of the unburied or unavenged. Those who ignored her rituals risked hauntings, while those who honored her were protected. For this reason, she was not only a goddess of witchcraft, but also of exorcism, the one who could banish spirits just as easily as she could summon them. Hecate's connection to magic went far beyond fear. She appeared in protective charms, healing spells, and rites of divination. Women especially honored her as a patroness, believing she understood both the dangers of childbirth and the mysteries of life and death. In her, they saw a goddess who moved outside the rigid hierarchies of Olympus, one who listened to those often ignored. To call on Hecate was to seek guidance in the unknown, whether that meant the future, the realm of the dead, or the hidden powers that moved unseen. She was not a goddess of open temples and shining altars, but of secret shrines, crossroads, and household doorways. She was the goddess of witches, and through her, mortals touched forces far older and darker than Olympus itself. Hecate and Medea. Among mortals, none carried Hecate's mark more strongly than Medea, the sorceress of Colchis. A granddaughter of Helios, Medea was famed for her skill in herbs, potions, and enchantments. But every ancient source makes clear her power did not come from herself alone. She was a priestess of Hecate, and it was the goddess of witchcraft who gave her strength. When Jason and the Argonauts arrived in Colchis in search of the Golden Fleece, they faced impossible tasks. Jason was ordered to yoke fire-breathing bulls, to sow the earth with dragons' teeth, and to defeat the warriors that sprang from them. Alone, he would have perished, but Medea, guided by Hecate, gave him potions and incantations that allowed him to survive. The goddess's blessing flowed through her, turning the impossible into triumph. Later, when Jason sought to take the Golden Fleece itself, guarded by a sleepless serpent, it was again Medea's knowledge of spells and herbs knowledge she claimed from Hecate that lulled the beast to sleep. The fleece was won, and Jason's quest succeeded. But it was Hecate's priestess who made it possible. Yet Hecate's influence through Medea was not only for aid and love. It was also for vengeance. When Jason betrayed her, Medea's fury became the stuff of legend. She called upon the dark powers of Hecate, summoning curses and using poison gifts to destroy Jason's new bride. In Euripides' tragedy, her revenge reaches its peak in the unthinkable act of murdering her own children, an act framed as part of the dark inheritance of her patroness. The Greeks often used Medea as a cautionary tale, proof of what happens when mortal women wield too much power. But beneath the tragedy runs a deeper truth. Every spell, every act of cunning, every terrible deed of Medea was tied to Hecate. Through Medea, Hecate's shadow touched the world of heroes and kings, proving that the goddess of thresholds was never confined to shrines and crossroads alone. Hecate was not present in the Argonautica as a character, but her presence was unmistakable. Wherever Medea walked, Hecate walked with her. Triple moon goddess, as centuries passed, Hecate's image continued to shift. The Greeks had first known her as a single torch-bearing goddess. But by the classical and Hellenistic eras, she became something more complex, a deity with three forms, standing at the center of a powerful new tradition. This was the triple-bodied Hecate. As we mentioned earlier, shown in statues as three women joined back to back, each holding torches, daggers, or keys. She faced in three directions at once, a fitting symbol for her dominion over Crossroads. But the image went deeper than roads alone. The number 3 spoke to her control over all transitions past, present, and future. Life, death, and rebirth, the worlds of Olympus, Earth, and the Underworld. She was a goddess who did not move through boundaries, but contained them all at once. This triple aspect also merged her with other powerful female deities. Over time, Hecate became associated with Artemis, the huntress of the wild, and Selene, the shining moon. Together, the three were envisioned as different faces of the lunar cycle: Artemis as the maiden, Selene as the mother, and Hecate as the crone in later tradition, even though earlier myths sometimes showed her in youthful form. It was not a strict division, but it reflected the way the Greeks and later the Romans began to see her as part of a divine unity of moonlight, wilderness, and night. In this form, Hecate became even more connected to women in their lives. The phases of the moon were tied to cycles of fertility and childbirth, making her both a guardian of mothers and an ominous figure of aging and death. To worship her was to acknowledge the full cycle: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The triple-bodied statues of Hecate were often placed at crossroads and city gates where offerings could be left at her feet. By facing three ways, she could watch in every direction, protecting and warning at the same time. To the Greeks, these statues were not just art, but living symbols of her vigilance, her ability to stand where mortals feared to linger. This tradition gave Hecate an enduring form that would outlast many other gods. In later eras, she was no longer just the shadowy figure at the edge of myth. but a goddess whose triple aspect became one of the most enduring images of feminine power and mystery. Misconceptions about Hecate. Over the centuries, Hecate's image became clouded by fear, folklore, and later reinterpretations. To the Greeks, she was complex and multifaceted. But as her worship spread and evolved, certain misconceptions began to take hold, distortions that continue even today. One of the most common is the idea of Hecate as purely a dark or evil goddess, little more than a demoness of ghosts and witchcraft. While she appeared in curses and rites of necromancy, this reflected only part of her role. In her earliest worship, she was invoked at thresholds for protection and guidance, not dread alone. Another misconception is the confusion between Hecate and other goddesses of night, a blending that later inspired the triple moon tradition, but often blurred her distinct identity. Hecate was not Artemis, and she was not Selene. She simply intersected with their realms in later interpretations. She was a Titaness with her own independent origins, honored by Zeus himself and entrusted with powers beyond almost any Olympian. A further mistake is equating Hecate with Nyx, the primordial night. Both goddesses were tied to darkness, but Nyx was a force of pure creation, a being older than the Titans themselves. Hecate, though associated with night and mystery, was born of Perseus and Asteria and belonged to the Titan generation. To merge them is to blur their entirely different roles in the cosmic order. Finally, later traditions, especially in the Roman world and even more so in modern imagination, often reduced her to a crone figure, a withered goddess of witchcraft and fear. In truth, the Greeks never confined her to such a narrow image. In early myths, she could appear as youthful and powerful, a torch-bearing guide to Persephone, while in Orphic hymns she could take on a majestic, cosmic, motherly form. Her appearance shifted with the stories, reflecting the many roles she held rather than a single, fixed portrayal. The misconceptions that narrow her to one aspect overlook what the Greeks understood well. Hecate was a goddess of thresholds and choices, of boundary places where opposite forces meet. Neither wholly dark nor wholly bright, she embodied the connection between them, a presence that shaped the unseen world. Legacy of Hecate. Hecate's influence did not fade when the great age of Greek myth ended. If anything, her presence grew stronger in the centuries that followed, as her worship spread from public shrines to private households and later into mystery cults and magical traditions that stretched far beyond Greece. Her legacy extended into philosophy and mysticism as well. The Neoplatonists of late antiquity revered her as a mediator between realms, a goddess who connected the divine to the mortal. In their writings, she became the world's soul, a cosmic force bridging the heavens and the earth. This philosophical Hecate was less a figure of crossroads and spirits and more an expression of universal harmony. Even into the modern era, her presence endures. In Wicca and Neopaganism, she is revered as a central figure, a goddess of the moon, of magic, and of feminine power. She embodies cycles of life, death, and renewal, her torches still burning for those who seek her in the mysteries of the night. In literature and popular culture, she appears again and again, a symbol of shadow, choice, and hidden wisdom. Few gods of Greece have carried such lasting influence. Zeus may have ruled Olympus, Apollo may have shone as the sun, but Hecate remains alive in ritual, in belief, and in imagination. She was never merely a figure of fear. She was the torchbearer in the night, the keeper of the keys, and the presence that revealed that shadow is not the enemy of light but its companion. Because in truth, Hecate was never limited to the crossroads of ancient Greece. She lives in every choice we fear to make, every ending we refuse to face, every new beginning that demands courage. We meet her each time we step into the unknown. And whether we know it or not, she walks beside us, torch in hand.